I want you to imagine an incarceration camp, like those where Japanese Americans were held during World War II. Do you see guard tower and barbed wire and barracks? You should, because those were all key features of these landscapes where whole families were held between 1942 and 1945. When I picture one of those locations, Amachi, I see all of those things, but I also see trees and flowers and vegetables. I see gardens everywhere. And that's because of what I've learned through 7 field seasons of archaeological research alongside crews of students and community members. You see, archaeology isn't just about the distant past. It's also a great way to learn about more recent human history, especially what doesn't end up in textbooks. And there's a very good chance that even if you grew up in the US, you know next to nothing about Japanese American internment, even though it's one of this country's clearest acts of systemic racism, and it happened only 80 years ago. Soon after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the government put in place a series of military and executive orders that resulted in the removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Of the 120,000 people who were displaced, 2/3 were American citizens, born and raised. Most people had just 1 week's notice before they had to report to local detainment centers. After several months there, they would be sent to one of 10 confinement camps in remote areas of the interior of the United States. The one where I work was officially called the Grenada Relocation Center, but it's actually better known by its postal designation of Amachi, and it was the smallest of those 10 camps, but still it was huge. It held over 8,000 people at its peak. And photographs taken early on showed just how desolate it was when Amachians arrived. You see, it's in the high plains of Colorado. It's a really dry and windy region, and it was only just coming out of the Dust Bowl. So the sandy soil is really only good for growing hardy native plants, but even those were hard to come by because the central camp area had just been scraped with a bulldozer for construction. And so one incarceree recalled, everybody was so shocked. There was nothing but sand and sandstorms and tumbleweeds, not a thing to see. And the indoor spaces weren't much better. Barracks rooms were tiny and terrible. They were covered in tar paper, and most were only 20 by 20 feet. Unlike most archaeologists, I actually get to talk to people who lived at my site. And so our research at Amachi began with conversations because those would help us know what to look for and why it was important. One of those was with George Hirano, who, like most Amachians, was removed from California. And he kindly shared his memories as well as photographs of his family and the vegetable garden that they grew in front of their barrack. And he told me how his mom would take the produce from that garden and turn it into traditional Japanese-style pickles, which were a really welcome break from the institutional meals that were served at the mess hall. And we knew the Hiranos weren't the only ones who had worked really hard to transform this landscape. And so as we started the first processes of archaeological research, which is survey and just kind of walking back and forth slowly across the site, we knew that we should find at least a few evidence of gardens. But what we found just blew us away. In every single barracks block, we found an amazing variety and number of gardens. Now, survey isn't enough to tell us about some of the more complicated of these spaces, and so we also choose some to excavate. And the first 2 that we dug at Amachi were pretty obvious. They had 2 big oval garden beds. And as we carefully removed the soil that had blown in since the camp closed, we discovered that not only were those walls intact, is that they'd been made of cinder block that had been carefully split into 4 pieces. And it's really clever because as used, it looks a lot like basalt, which is a material that you might expect in a Japanese garden. As we continued to dig, we found decaying bits of the tree that had been planted there, and also an abundance of native plant seeds. You see, transplanting wild plants into your garden is an incredibly old Japanese gardening technique, millennia. And yet here it's being employed in these very symmetrical, sort of European-influenced gardens. And it's really poignant because these gardens aren't Japanese and they aren't American. They are Japanese-American gardens, and a reminder that the people in the camp called both cultures their own. As we were completing this excavation, I was so lucky to meet Bentani, an Amachi survivor, who not only remembered this garden, he had pictures of his family in it. And when you see these and the beautiful looks on his family's faces, it reminds me of what Jean Wakasuki Houston wrote about another camp's gardens, those at Manzanar, where you could, for a while, not be a prisoner at all. And yet, of course, they are prisoners. And the story behind this photograph is really hard to wrap your head around. Two of these young men were about to be shipped off to the European front. They were Americans fighting for the freedoms that were being denied their family and friends behind barbed wire. The second season we were at Amachi, we excavated a portion of a garden in front of a barrack that was occupied by Saichiro and Bun Hirota. The Hirotas were an older couple who, before the war, had managed a furniture store in Los Angeles. And I was absolutely delighted when my crews discovered that they had very carefully added in crumbled eggshell to improve the nutritionally poor soil of this garden, which is something I actually do in my own garden at home. And we also discovered that they had taken 2 pieces of broken ceramic water pipe and set them upright and used them as planters. And what's so interesting about this eggshell and these broken pieces of pipe is that actually those wouldn't have been easy to come by. And it's something that we learned from another Amachi survivor who visited us that summer, and she said, you know, in order to get eggshell, you actually needed to know somebody who worked in the kitchens. And likewise, only somebody who took out the trash would have had broken construction materials. So the Hirotas were not landscape professionals or farmers, but they were really creative, and they were connected. And they used their social ties to personalize a space that they hadn't chosen to live. In 2012, we excavated what turned out to be a stunning Japanese-style entryway garden. And the reason that we chose to further explore it was a primary feature that was a wall that looked like it could be made out of stone, but is actually made out of concrete. And it reminds me of something that a man that we are so fortunate to work with, Greg Kitajima. He is an Amachi descendant and also a garden professional. And he said of Amachi's gardeners, they were so limited in what they had, the use of concrete slabs is reflective of the Japanese-American spirit. In this garden, as we removed the soil that was between the doorway and that wall that was directly in line with it, what we realized is that they were connected by this amazing cedar walkway, and then there were a series of stepping stones that went around that wall. This is an entryway garden, so each time somebody came and went through this barrack, and as they approached this wall, they would have had to slow down and be present for at least that moment. And that kind of mindfulness is actually one of the goals of traditional Japanese tea garden design, and a state of being that otherwise would have been really hard to achieve at Amachi. That summer, like most, we actually collected some of the soil, which we send away to the laboratory for the analysis of pollen remains. So I'm always super excited when that report hits my email inbox. It's kind of like Christmas. I never know what surprises it's going to hold. And in this case, what it showed us was that this garden was just full of plants, including mint and also canna, which is a tropical plant that's a relative of ginger and would have been terrifically hard to grow on the high plains. It's really clear that these gardeners were talented and that they had worked really hard to make a garden that not only looked beautiful, but also smelled beautiful. So while it's true that the gardens at Amachi transformed a hostile landscape into one that was more pleasant and productive, I think there's something deeper at play. Muso Soseki, who designed one of the first Zen garden temples, said, "He who distinguishes between the garden and the practice cannot be said to have found the true way. And 700 years later, research in horticultural therapy is proving him right. In study after study, it's clear that gardening reduces the physiological effects of stress, of anxiety, and even of trauma. And working in a garden is even more effective. It seems that gardening was a practice uniquely suited to help these people of Japanese ancestry cope with a nearly unlivable situation. In taking care of their gardens, they took care of themselves and each other. One of the best parts of my job is getting to spend so much time with Amachians. Carlene Tanagoshi Tinker was only 3 when the train carrying her family pulled into Grenada, and she remembers almost nothing of her time in camp, a lot because her parents wouldn't talk about it. A stalwart volunteer for 6 field seasons, Carlene says that doing archaeology at Amachi is helping her dig for her roots. And I've seen personally how being on site has helped her recover childhood memories. But the relationship is reciprocal because Carlene's experiences enrich the archaeology. In 2018, we were excavating next to a building where it had held a preschool, and it turns out Carlene remembered having taken little naps with her blankie inside this building. And as the crews discovered a systematic alignment of trees that would have shaded this poorly insulated structure, we understood that to be a landscape of care. The picture that comes from the archaeology of Amachi's gardens is that of resourceful, innovative, and skilled people. When they were singled out for their ancestry, they did not deny it, but they expressed it insistently and creatively. And so they have left for us a testament to the human spirit in a world where forces seem bent on destroying it. And as of March 2022, Amachi is going to be a national park. And so that means that this is a legacy that will last for future generations. Thank you.